What's up, high school MC? I'm so excited to see you guys here. I know this series has been so much fun for me, and I hope it's been just as much fun for you. I just wanted to remind you that we do have live chat right here. We'd love to talk to you. Even if you don't want to talk to us throughout the message, just send us a message right here. Just let us know you're here so we can see who is watching. We can see the little number over here, how many watchers there are, but we don't know who they are unless you say so. Also, just wanted to remind you that we will be doing Zoom small group meetings. The code and the link to join the meeting is right below me, okay, in the description below. Guys, I hope you're doing well. I miss you. I love you, and we'll see you soon.
Easter, a time for fake grass, plastic eggs, these things, chocolate bunnies, and people dressed as bunnies. And then there are the weird parts of Easter, like fake grass, plastic eggs, these things, chocolate bunnies, and people dressed as bunnies, which is interesting. But what does all this stuff have to do with Easter? And if this holiday is about more than candy and wearing uncomfortable clothes to church and lunch with your relatives, what makes Easter happy?
Hello, High School Embassy. Welcome to the last week of our series, Happy Easter. We've been looking at this for 3 weeks now about what Easter is and what it means. And here we are finally in Holy Week leading up to Easter Sunday. And our hope is that you have learned and grown from this series, even though we're doing it in a little bit of a different way because of everything that's been going on. We're thankful for the opportunity that we have to still connect with you virtually here and then through things like Zoom afterwards, which, by the way, we are going to be doing again tonight. So make sure that you join in with us after that. The numbers, the codes, whatever you want to call them, are going to be right down below in the video description. So this is not the end. Like whenever I say that we're done, that's not the end of our time together at Embassy. We'll jump off here and go to our Zoom groups, boys and girls. And we would love to see you there. So I love Easter time. It's one of my favorite times of the year, not just because of like what we're celebrating, but also I just love the springtime and the warm weather and the kind of the shift. I love the smell in the air and kind of the freshness. But there's one thing that I really, really, really hate about Easter. Reese's peanut butter eggs. They're the worst. Like the absolute worst. The only worse candy than Easter peanut butter eggs, Peeps, right? I only know of one person who actually likes Peeps, and I know that he actually likes them because he just told me like 5 minutes ago that he does. And don't worry, it's not Jake, so you don't have to judge him. But I kind of feel like and know um, that I'm almost on my own when it comes to my hatred of Reese's peanut butter eggs. My wife loves them, and so I've been going to the store recently because Samantha has Janessa, and we just don't want her to be exposed to anything. So I'm doing the shopping, and that is both good and bad. It's good because Samantha gives me a list, and I go to the store and I get what we need. It's bad because I don't know my way around the store very well, and so I'm finding myself getting lost and like walking in circles. And when I get lost and I walk in circles, I get distracted, and then I pick up things that we don't need. One of those things that we do always need more of is Starburst jelly beans. So every time that I've gone to the store, I've come home with a pack of those. And both times that I've gone recently and come home with those, Samantha will say something like, "Where's my Reese's peanut butter egg? Why are you only getting candy for yourself?" And I'm like, "Well, see, here's the thing, babe. I hate Reese's peanut butter eggs so much that I don't even like consider their existence very much. So when I'm walking down the Easter aisle, the seasonal aisle, and I see candy, I see, well, Starburst jelly beans because it's the greatest candy ever. I'm not even thinking about Reese's peanut butter eggs at all. Now, I may be exaggerating a little bit my aloneness there. I'm sure that there are other people, maybe like Charlie, who can't even know whether or not he likes Reese's peanut butter eggs because he is allergic to peanuts, and so he can't even have them to know whether or not he likes them. So Charlie, you and me, bang, five. Um, I may be exaggerating my aloneness there a little bit, and that's okay. I'm content with that. But I think that what I'm trying to say and what I'm trying to highlight is that being alone is something that we've all felt. I can think of another time. Right after I moved to, well, not right after, but after I moved to New Hampshire, I was blessed to be able to live in a host family from January all the way to June, I believe, or even maybe longer than that. I think it was even September. It doesn't matter. I lived with a host family for a long time. And now, before I lived with a host family, I had lived in a house in Joplin, Missouri with a bunch of guys. And before that, I lived in a dorm in Joplin, Missouri with like 90 guys. And before that, I lived at home with my family. So, come September of 2014, I had a full time job lockdown and knew that my next step was to get my own apartment. And that was really exciting thing, really expensive thing. But I remember that first night that I was in my apartment was really like the first night that I'd ever been like alone, not just alone for like a night here or there, but like this is my space and only my space. And that's kind of a weird and eerie, lonely feeling for me. Now, at this point in your life, you probably aren't living on your own, but that doesn't mean that you haven't experienced loneliness. I can imagine that maybe for some of you, your loneliness came when your family moved from one city to another, or one state to another. Or maybe your friend group changed, or you lost a friend, that really close friend, and you just felt really alone. Maybe you and your significant other broke up, and like everything that you thought that you had with that person is now gone. Maybe it's that you're making certain decisions that your friends aren't making, or vice versa. Your friends are making a lot of poor decisions, and you refuse to compromise your values on those poor decisions. And so you're beginning to feel alone because of that. I think that we all know what it's like to be on our own. And it's different than independence or freedom, isn't it? This on your own feeling is more like loneliness, fear, uncertainty, and anxiety, all wrapped up into one. And when we feel like when we're on our own, we start to believe things that seem true in the moment, but generally aren't true at all. Maybe we think that nobody understands and probably never will, or that we'll never get through that thing that we're facing, or that we don't have enough strength to make it on our own. Maybe we become more afraid, and the isolation only intensifies it. Now, here's the thing about loneliness. What's so troubling about it is that statistically, almost half, 50%, almost 50% of Americans feel alone. Now, that statistic was given like before this quarantine and before this social distancing and isolation period that we found ourselves in. So I'm sure that those numbers have even skyrocketed even more during that time. Um, I have to admit, for me, sometimes being alone is great. I am a pretty high introvert, which means that I like to be alone. I can spend long periods of time pretty much all by myself and actually enjoy it. But there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. And when it comes to loneliness, our generation, your generation, friends, is flooded with it. And that sense of loneliness has contributed to a rise in things like anxiety and self harm and depression and even suicide in our culture. Why? Well, because loneliness tends to make us feel hopeless. Think about it. When we feel alone, we tend to feel overwhelmed. Maybe you're feeling overwhelmed right now, just with everything else that's going on. You're not quite sure what to do. We're overwhelmed by our situations, or our circumstances, or our feelings, or our pain, or our confusion. And here's what's crazy about that: loneliness feels so terrible to us because God actually wired us that way. Now, God didn't wire us to be lonely. That's not what I'm saying. He wanted us, I'm not saying that God wanted us to feel sad and depressed, but I am saying that, friends, you and I were created to be in community together, in relationships together. You and I were never meant to carry the weight of what we feel or experience or worry about on our own. And so it makes sense when we don't have that. It makes sense that when we don't have that, when we don't have what we were created for, things don't feel right. So, what do you do about it? Sure, FaceTiming with your friends is important, and joining a small group once all this is over is important as well. Even like Zoom, FaceTime meetings with us, even to a certain extent, connecting here on YouTube. Those are all things that we can do. But there are times when being alone and even feeling alone is just an unavoidable part of life. So, how do we handle it? How are how are you handling it right now during this time? Well, believe it or not, what happened the very first Easter and in the days that followed can be a game changer for us when it comes to how we handle the seemingly overwhelming problem. See, the very first Easter, Jesus' friends were feeling overwhelmed in a very similar way. For years, they had been following this guy named Jesus, traveling together, doing life together, eating all of their meals and sleeping out underneath the stars together, and spending all of this time, not just with each other, but with Jesus. And suddenly, Jesus just isn't there anymore. At least that's what they thought in those couple of days between Jesus' death and Jesus' resurrection. We don't generally tend to talk very much about Saturday. We spend a lot of our time focused on the crucifixion of Jesus on Friday and the resurrection of Jesus on Sunday. But man, think about how the disciples felt on Saturday. They didn't know the end of the story yet. All they knew is that their leader, their king, their Messiah, their Lord, their friend was dead. See, Jesus' closest friends and followers had walked away from jobs, from family, and friends, and finances, and safety just to follow after him. And then he died. The future that they thought was about to begin to start happening for themselves and for their leader, Jesus, and for their country as a whole disappeared. In the blink of an eye, everything changed. So, what did they do? Well, most of them stuck together, but some of them did run for their lives or hide from the people who killed Jesus. They had no clue what was about to happen next, and they thought, if this can happen to Jesus, this can happen to us. And we all know how the story ends. But at the time, well, they just didn't. So imagine their surprise and their relief Sunday morning when Jesus was resurrected from the dead and joined their group again, alive. I'm sure that they were so excited. And for the next 40 days, man, it was a party, just hanging out with Jesus every day, having meals with him. It was just back to old times. And then all of a sudden, one day, well, Jesus just floated away. He gave them a couple of final instructions and said, "You will be my witnesses in Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. And here's a couple of instructions, a couple of things to do. By the way, I'm out." And then he floated into the sky. And he left them there again. You heard that right. Jesus died, he came back, and then left again. But this time, their response was completely different. They weren't scared or panicked anymore. And we can know this because of a guy named Luke. He was a doctor, and he wrote the Gospel of Luke, which is the first of a two-part volume series. So the book of Luke is all about the story of Jesus, and the book of Acts is all about the story of the apostles and how the church grew from there. And according to Luke, when Jesus left the second time, His followers didn't seem to think that they'd been left alone again. In fact, it wasn't until after Jesus left the second time that Christianity actually took off and began to explode and change human history forever. And it seems that Jesus made it that way on purpose. We'll get to the rest of what Luke said, but before we do, I want us to look at another document written by one of Jesus' best friends, his very best friend, um, a book called The Gospel of John. John remembered that before Jesus was crucified, he told his disciples that he was going to go away. They just didn't understand it at the time. This is what he said in the final meal with his disciples before he was arrested. But in fact, it is better for you that I go away. So Jesus actually told his disciples, hey, it's better for them if he left. It's better for you if I go away. Why? Well, we find out as Jesus continues through the rest of the verse. Because if I don't, Jesus said, if I don't, the advocate won't come. If I do go away, then I will send him to you. Jesus said that in order for the advocate to come, he had to go. And now the term advocate generally or usually refers to someone who helps, comforts, and defends others. And friends, the same is true here. This advocate that Jesus is referring to is what we call the Holy Spirit. It is basically the Spirit of Jesus among us, even though he is not physically present with us. He is the one who helps us, who comforts us, and gives us wisdom and power beyond ourselves. The Holy Spirit came to earth after Jesus left the earth. To put it simply for you, Jesus knew that better than having him beside you is having him inside of you. Jesus promised that if he left, it would be better for us. Why? Because the Holy Spirit would be there. And once the Holy Spirit arrived, the power and spirit of Jesus could be everywhere on earth, not just wherever Jesus was. And so, right before Jesus ascends into heaven and leaves his disciples for the second time, he reminds them of what he said at the last meal together before he was killed. Yes, his physical body was leaving, but his spirit would remain behind. Check it out in Acts chapter 1. But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you, and you will be my witnesses, telling everyone about me everywhere, in Jerusalem, throughout Judea, in Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. Of all of the things that Jesus could have reminded his disciples, he chose to remind them that the Holy Spirit was on its way. The Holy Spirit would come and give them power to tell people all over the world about him. And it was a reminder that even though Jesus was leaving, they would not be alone. And guess what? Well, that's exactly what happened in the days and years to come. It was only 10 days from the time that Jesus ascended into heaven until the Holy Spirit descended upon the entire earth. And in those days and years to come, Jesus' followers would receive the power of the Holy Spirit to tell people all over the world about him. And today, roughly 1/3 of the earth's entire population believe this message. And the Christian movement, started by Jesus and carried about by his disciples, outlasted things like the Roman Empire, intense persecution from government and other religious officials, and thousands of years of change in philosophy and thinking and technology. The men and women who Jesus left twice started the greatest movement in human history. And even when their leader seemingly left, even when overwhelming lack of resources, even with their perceived powerlessness in the face of authorities of the day, the Holy Spirit gave them power, even though they seemed powerless. Friends, here's the best part about all of this. Jesus' promise wasn't just for the first disciples. When Jesus promised an advocate who would give us power and would be with us, that was true for every single person who would ever believe in him. This means that you and I have access to the very same Spirit. Friends, Easter means that you are never, ever alone. What Jesus promises us is that we don't have to be alone, even when we feel alone. Easter is so much bigger than a celebration of something that happened 2,000 years ago. Yes, Jesus' resurrection changed everything, and the resurrection is the center of everything that we believe as Christians. But it's also a reminder of his power and presence that are available to us today. Easter can change everything about how we live our lives right now because of this simple truth. Easter means that you are never alone. Jesus' first followers knew what it was like to feel like they were on their own. After he died, it seemed like all of their hopes and dreams were crushed. They may have even felt that they made a huge mistake in committing 3 years of their lives to follow this ragtag guy. And while I can imagine that they loved seeing Jesus come back to life, they were probably surprised that he didn't stay with them. They probably wondered how Jesus not being physically with them could actually be a good thing. But soon they learned that it was. Jesus left something behind. Actually, he left someone behind, an advocate, his Spirit, which reminded them that they would never, ever be alone. What if you and I could live with the same assurance that they did after receiving the Holy Spirit? What if, no matter how lonely or overwhelmed or misunderstood we felt, we could trust that we're never, ever alone? Let me ask it more directly. What if this was real? What if the literal, actual God who created the entire world died and rose again is literally always with you? What if the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of Jesus, is very real, very here, and wants to help you with whatever it is that you're facing today? You see, simply trusting that the Holy Spirit is with us can change everything for us. In fact, even though we can't see him, and in many ways it may not even feel like he's there in the moments that we feel like we're on our own, we can be confident of a couple of different things. The first thing is this: you can be confident that you can talk to him at any time, at any place, for any reason. When you feel alone, what if you chose to talk to God about what you're going through? In the New Testament, we learn that the Holy Spirit helps us to talk to God when we don't even know what to say. That's right out of Romans chapter 8. What if the next time you're feeling like you're all alone, you chose to talk to God about what it is that you're feeling or facing? What would happen if you chose to believe that he hears you and that his Spirit is at work even when you can't see it? The second thing that you can be confident in is this: you are stronger than you think you are. The odds were so very stacked against Jesus' first disciples. Jesus wasn't there. They were underqualified. They were undereducated. The Romans were incredibly powerful. And yet the movement that they carried forth into the world has forever changed the world. That's because that they knew that they were stronger than they had ever seemed. They knew that even though they looked like they were on their own, they had God's power, God's Spirit moving and working inside of them. And the same is true for you and I, friends. When we face challenges that seem way too big, overwhelming, we can be confident that the Holy Spirit's power in us cannot be overcome. We can also be confident that God's power in other believers will be there to support us too. You may feel like what you're facing is too powerful for you, and that may be true. It may be too powerful for you, but nothing in this world is too powerful for Jesus. And nothing in this world is too powerful for his church. Friends, you're a part of his church, and Jesus' Spirit lives inside of you. So that means, friends, that nothing is too powerful for you. Remember, Easter means that you are never alone. The power of Easter is that Jesus enabled us to be confident that we'll never be alone again. Why? Because we trust that his Spirit lives inside of us. In a day and age where many of us are lonely, this might be the happiest news that we've heard in a really, really long time. So I don't know what it is that you're facing. I don't know how it is that you're like emotionally and mentally handling this quarantine that we have found ourselves in right now. But friends, I need you to know that Easter means that you are never, ever alone. So as we finish up here and we head to our Zoom groups, think about this question. In what areas in my life do I feel alone? And maybe even to add on to that, and how am I handling that aloneness? We're really excited to help kind of walk through this with you guys in our Zoom groups. We hope that you will take a little bit of extra time out of your evening and join us together for that. That's the end, friends, of our Happy Easter series. We hope that you have learned and grown from it. I know that it's been a great reminder for me of a lot of different truths about what Easter is. Friends, we're excited. We're going to start a new series next week right here on a YouTube premiere. We can't wait to see you there. But until then, happy Easter.